meant the opium dens.
Yep.
And so where the Fairmont was down here at the corner, starting all the way back past Tin Lizzie's, and sometimes it would go all the way to that stoplight that led you to Boulder Canyon Road. That was probably where those 75 saloons were in 1877. Well, that was where, yes, 75 saloons. That's where all the priorities were. Yeah, there was a lot of men, 8,000 to 10,000 men in those early days. So they had a lot of need for those saloons.
That's amazing.
Yeah, right?
On the line.
Yeah, and you can believe that there were boxes and cribs in the back of all those bars and saloons. And then eventually they'd be rooms above. And then pretty soon the madams moved in, right? Amazing. Well, anyway, as long as the women kept their businesses within the Badland region and minded their manners and dressed appropriately, not too many people hemmed and hawed and tried to run these blatant harlots out of town. But you know who did give a fuss? This guy right here. His name was E.L. Sen. And he was a party pooper. He went after all the vices, the drinking, the gambling, and the prostitution. He was the newspaper man, and he ran the Deadwood Daily Telegraph. And he was the odd man out in these parts, and the men of Deadwood were getting sick and tired of his cotton-picking piousness. They go on down to his business, tear up his printing press and everything else in his building. Then they burn his building down. Then they go to his house and they beat him up real good just in case he didn't get the message loud and clear. Yeah, right? Deadwood was a wild time Deadwood had always clung to its vices, right? It adopted an attitude of, we'll do things our way and the rest of the country be damned. So even during Prohibition, you could walk down Main Street, get a good shot of liquor, a poker game, and a romp in the hay if you were so inclined. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You sounded real quick. You did.
I did.
There you go.
So also, even though it was Prohibition, one of our well-known madams, Madame Dora DeFrand, who was very successful, she was so successful, her and her husband Joe had a string of brothels all throughout the Black Hills. Anyway, she was arrested not for having a house of ill repute, mind you, but for selling liquor. And she was fined $5,000 because they knew she could pay it. And she paid it without blinking an eye. And when she did, she said, well, you can't run a sporting house off of creek water. Pretty sure that's how she said it. When you see her picture in the last room, you will agree. That's how she said it. Yes. So also something happens in the 1920s. The South Dakota State's Attorney, he does a brothel raid. He tries to shut the brothels down, but with very little success. The only thing that the local law officials would allow to stick was arresting for these women for running a disorderly house, disturbing the peace, and for selling liquor. The women paid a modest fine and were once again open for business. Mm-hmm. Yes, because these people were not about to part with their big money-making machine.
Yeah.
This is what kept Deadwood going. It wasn't the gambling. That was the side dish. The brothels, this was the main dish. Mm-hmm.
So you had men coming in from out of town, staying at
Oh,
hotels?
yes,
just to
putting
drink
money
and-
down in all our businesses, our saloons, bars, even wherever they were playing poker. Gambling was not legal until 1989.
Yeah.
So there were hush-hush rooms of a game here, a game there. But yep, they all came for this. And all of them were probably, well, they could have been married, but most of them were ranchers and loggers and railroad men. And that railroad brought a lot of
Oh, yeah.
business. Yep. And of course the miners up in Deadwood, Lead.
Yeah.
There were a lot of them too. And
Mhm.
most of them were not married, so yeah.
Now, what's the difference between a brothel and you said a couple of madams would get?
Oh, a bordello?
Yeah.
That's a high-end one where they're dressed to the nines. I mean, they're dressed exquisitely.
Okay.
And they have a parlor. It's all very expensive. It appealed to those, it was a higher price, and the women were better looking, well, better kept as well. And it was probably more for the lawmen, the politicians and so forth, the rich people.
Okay.
Yep. And there was even one I hear in Spearfish. Yep, that catered to because the Spearfish was quite rich back in the day. Yeah. Yeah,
Well.
Interesting.
You're very interesting.
Thank you.
You're more interesting than Brazil.
Ah, I love it. So on vice, Prostitution was its one last link to its Wild West upbringing. It was its youth. It's what it's known.
Yeah.
A lot of the locals told me, like, once they went to other towns, they were shocked to find that they didn't have any brothels. They were shocked because they were so used. This was a way of life. You just knew that the brothels were here. Yeah, and if you were a little kid, you'd just be walking down Main Street going, I don't know if I'm walking past a brothel or not. You know, you'd just be like, because we didn't have to say brothel on it. Everybody that was of age knew which door to go into.
So you were saying little kids. There were a lot of married families then.
Yeah.
Did the husbands come down?
Heck yeah. In fact, one guy that was on my tour this summer, his mother would say they get in fights, or his dad would get owly. She'd give him a 20 and say, here, go down to the brothels and don't come back until you're happy. Right? And you know what? A lot of the locals said they felt extremely safe. You know, the people that were around in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, they felt so safe for their children. There were no rapes. There were no kidnappings, no nothing. They left their doors open, never locked, and the kids played out well past dark sometimes, and they felt very safe because there was a place for them to come and go. Yeah, for the men, for their needs, all those bachelors and stuff. Yeah.
Wow.
Fascinating. Yeah. Very interesting. Let's go this way.
Okay.
We're going to go into the 40s and 50s room. Go ahead, take your time, this is probably the home state gold mine as well. That's a machine that they use to clean out the dirt with looking for the gold.
Goodness.
Yeah, fascinating, right?
So they would dump the dirt up on...
Yeah, somehow I don't know how that worked, but they had all these contraptions. Va-va-va-voom.
And they even had photographers back then taking new pictures.
Yes. And also here we have some ranchers, local ranchers and loggers that were definitely clients of the brothels. Yes. Okay, come on in here. So the 40s and 50s. So right there, that picture right there, in the early 40s, World War II happens and ends, but before it ends, the home state gold mine shuts down, and it's for mining, and the local women, while the men are fighting in the war, are making hand grenades and parachutes for the war.
Oh, wow.
And out of that parachute material, they make these skirts. And they sell these skirts for war relief, to make sure that their men can eat overseas. Well, you know who buys these skirts, don't you? The brothel women. They buy them by the dozens because it's good for business, and they like to give back to the men in the war.
Yep.
Also in 1942, Ellsworth Air Force Base is built north of Rapids, so we've got a bunch of young bucks coming to Deadwood looking to lose their virginity and keep it lost, right? Mm-hmm. Yes. And then in 1943, Mount Rushmore is finally finished, so now we've got tourists coming to the Black Hills.
Huh.
Also, mid-40s, something extremely popular happens, and that's deer hunting season. And all people nationwide hear about how well the deer hunting is in the Black Hills and how beautiful it is. So men from all over are coming to the hills. But once they find out about Deadwood, each year they just keep on coming to Deadwood. They don't even bother going hunting. And they're putting money down in all of our businesses, but especially the brothels. I call it the bike rally for the brothels. Vroom, vroom. Yeah. They make a lot of money in a short amount of time. And some of these women, some of these mothers, girlfriends, and wives were getting a little suspicious each year when their husbands would go away for their hunting, their deer hunting. So one wife did a